This is Solve It for Kids.
Hello, my amazing and curious friends. My name is Jennifer, the Dean of all things STEM and STEAM, and this is Solve It for Kids, the science podcast that gives kids and families a peek inside the real world of scientists, engineers, and experts as they solve problems in their jobs using creativity, cooperation, and critical thinking. And now please welcome to the show my podcast partner, Galactic Space Geek, Jeff Gagne.
Hello, Jennifer, and hello, listeners. Wow. I am so intrigued by today's guest and our topic and problem that we are solving that I can't wait to get into it because I'm really not even sure where we're going to begin.
Yes, this is going to be a really fun and kind of different topic that we're covering here. So what problem are we solving today?
How does a landscape architect shape the world?
How does landscape architecture shape the world? Ooh, I already love this question. So who is our guest today, Jeff?
I agree with you, Jennifer. Let's get to it. Our guest today is Chris Flagg. He is a fellow within the industry of landscape architecture.
Welcome to the show, Chris.
Wow, not sure I can top that, Jeff, but thank you. And just it's an absolute pleasure to be here. And I'm absolutely excited to chat with you both tonight. So thank you for this.
Oh, well, we are thrilled to have you. And and I mean, I'm so excited to learn more about what landscape architecture people do because, you know, most of us think that it's just planting trees and everything, but we were talking to you beforehand and it's not at all like that.
The misconception of landscape architecture, I think, is because the word landscape is combined with architecture. But I like to think of it as site architecture. And really, what we do as landscape architects, we have the opportunity to design and to envision everything that's from the ground level up.
Wow.
Yes, plant material is a part of it, but so is architecture, so are streets, so is our utilities and infrastructure, spaces, everything related to community building and great places. We have the opportunity to develop and design, and it's an absolutely thrilling profession to be a part of.
That's awesome. So as a kid, were you designing spaces and looking out in your backyard and saying, Mom, Dad, move these things around?
Well, what's funny is I love the outdoors. I grew up in New Orleans, but I was always outside. Mom and Dad used to always have to hunt me down.
I was that kid too.
Yep, I ran the streets as a kid, but all good.
Yeah.
And loved the places and spaces and played all sports and that sort of thing. So yes, love the outdoors. But I think my biggest passion was my love of drawing and art and creativity.
Oh.
So as a young child, I was always doodling, drawing, and I wanted to see how I could really solve my creative juices, if you will, through not only art, but also being outdoors and dealing with outdoor spaces in a way that is creative. Wow, to be able to think, design, and create, and oh, by the way, draw. That pardon the pun, but that drew me to landscape architecture in a really good way.
That's fantastic.
Nice.
Yeah.
And well punned. So if you could connect a couple of dots for our younger listeners, a lot of them have these interesting things that are very appealing for them. How did you end up connecting the dots? A lot of kids like to draw and they carry around their notebook, and whether they're drawing landscapes or, manga characters, how did you end up connecting the dots that this might be a career?
It's interesting because in high school, I actually didn't have an idea of what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted it to be creative. Okay. Yes, I thought of pure architecture. To me, pure architecture was, and no offense, but I thought it was a little bit inward oriented. I love designing buildings and great. There's many great architects that I follow, and I certainly appreciate all of what they do. But I wanted to be broader. I wanted it to be more expansive. I thought, how wonderful would it be to deal with outdoor spaces? I stumbled upon landscape architecture my first year in college. And I looked at architecture. I spent a semester in architecture, and I said, I'm not quite sure this is going to be what I want to do. I stumbled upon landscape architecture, and I looked at the curriculum, and I said, ooh, wow, 5-year undergrad.
Oh.
Okay. But it's got a lot of art. It's got a lot of art history. It's got fine arts. It's got design. It's got science. It's got technology. It's got engineering. It's got all of those factors that, if I could, and again, being from South Louisiana, if I could put that recipe together into gumbo that is really tasty, then I want to give it a shot. And all this happened when I was 17 years old.
Wow.
I have a lot of people ask me, what would you do over again if you had to make that decision again?
Yeah.
I'd make the same one. So at 17, I made one of the best decisions ever.
That's fantastic.
Well done.
Yeah. Well, thank you. So it was exhilarating to be a part of it.
So can you kind of explain to us a little more in depth, like what do you do as a landscape architect?
Part of it is quite a diverse profession, Jennifer. So one of the things, certainly you can deal with pure landscape architecture. And that's, it could be residential planting design. It could be large scale planting design. It's with the focus on plant material. And again, obviously, that's the basis and really the foundation of landscape architecture is its ability to know plant material, their growing characteristics, their seasonal characteristics, shade types and tolerances. We had to learn thousands of plant material while in college and understand their use, know where to put them, how to use them, how to create the best exposure. It was sort of right plant for right place. So that's a component. So when I got into landscape architecture, I said, plant material is fine, but, I want to think bigger picture. I'd like to say, okay, how do I use plants and how do I shade maybe a building? How do I shade a street? How do I shade a park? How do I deal with connectivity between all of that? And I said, I love master planning. I love large scale designing. I love urban design, community planning. I gravitated into that level of professional pursuit because of the framework that landscape architecture offered me. And it's been exciting ever since because some of the projects I've had the opportunity to be involved with, from college campuses to cityscapes to international work, all of that is so influential to people to create memorable spaces. And I often ask people, I said, what do you remember when you were in college or in high school or as a kid growing up? What do you remember? Do you remember a building or do you remember a space that you were in? A space maybe you played or there was an activity there that really, really brought back some fond memories. So that's what landscape architecture is to me. And that's why I've loved it so long within this profession.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
That makes a whole lot of sense, and that really helps me wrap my brain around that title, which is exactly what Solve It for Kids is all about.
Yes.
You just mentioned some of the jobs that you worked on, and you mentioned college campuses, and it's always been a weird fascination of mine, but I have a feeling you're going to get it. I love the idea of a campus. There's ground, there's usually a fence to separate the campus, but there's buildings and there's parking and there's pathways and there's usually the open spaces, maybe a pond, depending on what it is, a playground or that type of stuff. Can you tell us a little bit about a job or two that you did, maybe one that was a college campus? And I love the idea of a cityscape as well.
Wow, Jeff, I think from here on in, I anoint you as an honorary landscape architect for noticing all those wonderful components of a campus because, with college, what any campus is, whether it's high school, whether it's elementary school, whether it's university, it's an urban design process. It's urban design. It's housing,
urban design.
It's walkability, it's connectivity, all of that combined into a college campus that, yes, where is the boiling pot of knowledge and education? Where are the great experiments given? And that's on the university, at the university level, to where let's try mass transit, let's try walkable communities, let's try building adjacencies and relationships. All of that comprise a campus that is connected through shady walks, through pleasant spaces, community spaces, village greens, everything related to say, a city, you have within the campus as well. And the demographic there is learning as well. So that environment continues to be a learning environment as we, produce great spaces and great buildings and just hopefully an inspiring environment.
Well, that's another thing that kind of leads us towards our question, because when I think of campuses, which I notice everything else that Jeff was talking about, but I think I react to them a little bit more on the emotional level. Yes. Right? When they're set up well and the flow is great and they have lots of green spaces, you just feel calm and kind of peaceful when you're walking through them. And I've noticed that. I live in Jacksonville, Florida, as you do. And, lately I've noticed, like, if you go to some of these hospitals outside, there are these gorgeous kind of places where you want to just sit down under a tree or whatever. And it strikes me as, being in a hospital could be like a stressful time, but then you walk outside. So do you work on any of these things? And when you do it, do you think about like the mental image that you're putting in the people's heads? All
the time. Very, very well summarized too, Jennifer. You're exactly right. Contemplative spaces, healing gardens and healing spaces. It's very popular these days. Certainly the mental stress that all of us are under through the normal day. Isn't it nice to become one with nature? When they say you have a high stress level, what do? Take a walk. Take a walk in nature. Right. Enjoy the sounds and the sights. Right. Turn off your phone, leave it at home, and check out really the sounds and natural smells, the experiential opportunities that nature provides. It is certainly a mental asset. For sure. And Jeff, you had mentioned, a particular campus. As Jennifer and I are being veterans of Jacksonville, Florida. Yeah. University of North Florida is a university that I'm very fond of. I started their master plan in 1984. Oh, wow. It was a university that was established in 1972. So I came on relatively early in my early years here in Jacksonville to have that opportunity to plan a campus that had 1,500 acres, but only 90 acres were developable. So we had to create a campus that was not only educational based, but it was also environmentally sensitive. So we had to plan it is. You've done
I have to say, you've done a very good job, because we've watched it over the years change. Yes. And wow, it's amazing.
It's amazing. It's been said that it's one of the most beautiful natural campuses within the Florida State University system. And we're all very proud to have had a small hand in that development, for sure.
There you feel like you're part of nature and that you're supposed to be, not Absolutely. Like, oh, look, there's a garden, right? Yes. It makes you feel like you're just kind of supposed to be, because there's lots of protected wetlands around there that you had to work with, I'm sure. It is. It's a very calming campus.
Yes, landscape architecture at its finest. And that's when you can really meld the natural environment with the built environment. It's much like the combination of science and art. You're dealing with the aesthetics of a site. Every site has its own personality. So how do you plan for it? How do you bring out that personality through its preservation and restoration, and also its development, but yet sensitively done?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, very exciting.
Okay. So the way you were just describing that with bringing out each place's characteristics, are there a couple of sort of trade secrets you could share with the rest of us when we are going through a campus or going through a city that maybe we could start taking a little more notice of, whether it's high ground, low ground, whatever, east-west facing versus north-south, whatever it may be?
Oh, that's good. And so what do you notice most about a city or a place when you go in? Is it a building? Is it a space? Is it the street? Is it a shady walk? Sometimes, when you notice a great street, you can say, okay, what's a great street? What defines a great street? Some people may say a lot of cars going very fast, getting from point A to point B. Yeah, and that's fine. Right. We have those. We don't want those in our downtowns, though. We want streets that will absorb the person, and you want to slow down. We call it traffic calming. We want to have shady streets, have protection for the pedestrians. We want to design streets to not only be for cars and for vehicles and for transit, obviously, but for people as well. So a great street is a street that balances its ability to transport cars and vehicles and also create a safe environment for pedestrians. And when you look at streets, even in the urban environment, they're public spaces. If you deal with them as a space, your mindset becomes a lot different. And that's why they call it parking, you know?
There you go. So I have a question. So at what point do you usually start a project? Because what we've had a guest here on the show before about how you move water. I mean, do you go down to that level to have to, especially in Florida, decide what materials you're going to use, where you're going to have the water to go? Because you know we're going to have rain or storms. I mean, do you start at that level?
That's part of it. That's part of the puzzle. What's great is, you know, we all know water flows downhill for the most part. So once you have the grasp of that, drainage becomes relatively simple.
You just figure out where you want it to drain to.
Now where Jeff lives, you know, drainage is pretty common and pretty pronounced because it flows downhill relatively quickly. Where we live, Jennifer, we have to transport it sometimes. And sometimes we have to hold it up and say, time out. You're not really flowing. So yes, obviously civil engineering is part of it. How do you grade and drain a site? You have to, and architecture is yet another part. How do you place the buildings above flood lines and flood levels and ensure that during large storm events, we're not going to flood the building? How do you transfer water, that the runoff from buildings in hardscape, if you will, into areas that can be retained naturally and cleansed and before it's let out into the natural waterways that could be surrounding the site? All of those are considerations and part of the landscape architect's early design. So we call it a site analysis. We'll look at any site and you look at, what's good about this site and what's bad about this site? What are the opportunities and what are the constraints? Is it mature vegetation? Yes, we want to save trees. We want to save mature vegetation. Look at the wonderful differences between a site well designed when you preserve the existing natural conditions versus a site that's clear cut and built upon. I
hate when they do that. I do.
So therein lies the need for calling your local landscape architect because they're trained to ensure that all of these components of a great community or a great design are adhered to and at least addressed in a way that's good, bad, ugly, indifferent. We deal with aesthetics. If you love to draw and create, like I've always wanted to, always have as a young kid to today, I still love to draw and paint, but art brought me there as well. It's a profession to where you think of it, you draw it, you refine it, present it, hopefully get it approved by a client that says, hey, great job. Or if they say, no, that's not a good job, go back to the drawing board. But then when you get it built and get it installed, that's the greatest gratification of a landscape architect. And then to watch it be utilized and used by those who you planned for. And that's a tremendous compliment and brings great gratitude for sure.
I'm sure. Absolutely.
That has got to be a really great feeling to do a college campus or a cityscape. And then to just sit there with your cup of coffee or beer and just watch it being used and people in traffic going by and enjoying. That's got to be terrific.
And sometimes designs are influenced by either whether you're drinking coffee or beer.
There you go.
Have a good design or bad design. Pick whatever you think might be.
Flat Earth services if you're by the bars.
So because you've already mentioned that you started working on the University of North Florida project in 1984, you have been doing this for a little while. Can you share with us a few concepts and things that you have noticed on how landscape architecture has changed from, say, the 1980s or 90s to today, and then take us 20 to 50 years in the future?
That's a great question, Jeff. And I've always thought that landscape architectural students and really landscape architects in general are underutilized and really at a point where it takes a level of education to what landscape architects can do. Landscape architecture
Okay.
as Frederick Law Olmsted, the father of landscape architecture, designed Central Park in New York, probably the greatest space in the
Wow.
world
Yeah.
in this heavy. And being the father of landscape architecture, obviously at that point, it's what do we do to have spaces and plant material affect lives? Today, the narrative
Okay.
comes to sea level rise, climate change, resiliency, all of the opportunities that the changing world brings to us as designers and design thinkers. How can we
Right.
influence that as a landscape architect? So, years ago, and I've been practicing a long time, you could even go back another decade since the 70s. There, Jeff. And landscape architects have really been at the focal point of what real holistic design thinking could be.
Wow.
And it's gotten greater only because of some of the issues related to our environment.
Yeah.
And certainly with climate change and sea level, all the things I previously mentioned, landscape architects should be at the forefront of design thinking. They should be leading design teams because of our general knowledge of a lot of things. It's architecture, engineering, art, culture, experiences, all of that we should pool together and hone into what we feel is a space that is, or a place that is a great place and an influential place.
Yeah.
Not
I
sure
like
if I
that.
answered your question, but there's
Yeah,
there's a
no.
lot
You
to the,
did.
Yeah.
and I have a quick story I'll relate. Early in my
Yeah.
career, my first year as a practicing landscape architect, I worked for a small company up in West Hartford, Connecticut, and my boss let me out to my first client. He said, "Hey, I have this family that called. They want a residential design. Just go
Okay.
knock on their door." And I said, "Oh, great! This is great." So I brought the one tie I've had for 15 years. It probably still had some taco stains on it from school, and I tightened up and I said, "This is great. I have my first client contact. I'm basically right out of school. I can talk to them
Right.
about design. I could influence them into the world of landscape architecture." So I knock on the door, and this large gentleman answers the door, and I identify myself, and he turns around and he says, "Hey, Mabel, the florist is here." So I began to realize my 5 years of very hard work, multiple all-nighters, this change the world attitude of a young landscape architect. My ego was handed to me. I stuck it in my back pocket.
And you picked the plants
I
for
picked the
them.
plants, but the florist was here. So I've been called a lot of
Little did,
things.
little did you know 5 years of college would get you all the way to, well, we'll put some petunias over here.
Oh my gosh, that's
So the
funny.
realm of possibilities of what a landscape architect can be are just infinite.
Yeah, yeah. Well, okay, so that kind of leads to the question that I was going to ask. So let's assume kids want to become landscape architects, or maybe even just adults want to kind of. Do you have any tips for if they could do that around their own house and their, keeping in mind that sometimes we have HOAs and you can't do exactly what you want.
I
But do you
served
have
as the
any
president of it.
tips for that? Yeah, there
Oh,
you
yeah.
go,
Yeah, all of this, you can tell the mind of a designer when they walk in someplace and, they're changing everything. Oh, why didn't they do that? Why is that door here? Is this napkin the right color? Is this, how can I move this? Well, that's the creative mind at work. So you need to channel that into either architecture, interior design, landscape architecture. When you're outside, how come that
Right.
space isn't big enough? Why isn't there enough shade? It's things of that sort that you say, okay, how can I be?
Oh.
So as a kid, I loved, and I tell you, the basis of all of my artistic desire has come from my desire to want to draw. And I
Okay.
always sketched, and I still do today. I journal, I sketch, I paint. That's my passion is watercolor. And I
That's
love to do
awesome.
everything from the creative side. And I always look at a design as an empty palette. And it's up to us as design thinkers to add the color to that palette.
Okay.
That's how I love to compare it to painting. But, kids should always, if you're creative, please don't lose your creativity.
Yes.
Always, as Michelangelo used to say, always be drawing and never waste time. Just draw. And today, with technology being what it is, you can use technology as well. You can leverage technology to be creative. I'm old school, so I love to pull out the pencil and just sketch.
Yes.
Yep, and then
Nice.
let it develop from there. But today, with the technology being what it is, use that in a creative way. There's so many platforms that you still can use, but never lose that brain to hand connectivity, that early thought process. process, that inspiration that comes from your brain, transfer it to your hand to the pencil, and he or she who holds the pencil rules the room. So when it comes to design, if you have a room full of executives, pull out a piece of paper and a pencil and see how their attention span all of a sudden focuses on what you're doing.
That's true. That's
pretty
true.
intriguing.
I like that.
So that's a fun way to captivate a room, and also think design. So never give up on your dreams of being creative. I love the fact that landscape architecture has just been elevated to a STEM curriculum, because now we can get it into schools earlier. I didn't know about landscape architecture. I stumbled upon it. I would have loved to.
I never heard the term until recently. You know, when you start noticing like all of the things that they're doing around the city and all of this kind of stuff, and I was like, well, who's doing this, right? Who's in charge of it? Yeah.
And I always like to say, from a design team perspective, and if any of my colleagues ever listen, they'll say, "Oh goodness, he's saying that again." But I love to tell everybody else what to do. I love to tell architects where to put their buildings. I love to tell transportation engineers where to put their roads. I love to tell civil engineers how to grade, environmentalists what to preserve. That's what I love to do, and that's how I again channeled my creative side from the world of landscape architecture into the world of design and design thinking.
That's awesome.
I think you just grabbed a whole bunch of listeners, and they are now on your side because they want to tell everybody what to do as well.
Yes, sir.
I got to squeeze one more question in.
Absolutely.
With all that we've been talking about, and you talked about that designer's mind, and you always got the pencil, and you've been doing this a long time. Is there a space somewhere in the world that you wish you could redesign?
You should have prepped me for that one, Jeff. That's a great. That's a great one, because there have been some great spaces that have been redesigned very successfully. A space to redesign. Great spaces don't need to be redesigned for sure, and that's is a little bit of a cop out. And then some of the great spaces have been designed, as we talked about, some of the urban parks and urban spaces and things of that sort. I'm going to stay local. And Jennifer knows this. I'm going to stay local. And I think the space along our riverfront, both North and South Bank, Jacksonville's a city with the opportunity to be a river city. And we have two sides of that river. We have a North Bank and South Bank, and the city is essentially bisected by this river, by the St. Johns River. I would love to have redesigned that linear space on both the North and South Banks. I have had the opportunity to design the riverfront on the South Bank, but that North Bank, it's gleaming with potential.
It is potential. Yep.
And I'd love to get in and redesign that in a way that makes Jacksonville like no other city.
Yeah. If you want my 2 cents,
that answer.
Put in an aquarium. That's what I want.
I love it. I'll show you a plan I did at Jacksonville many years ago.
Oh my God.
If they would have only listened.
There you go. That's what we need, an aquarium.
You were telling them what to do.
I was trying.
Just didn't hear it.
Oh my gosh. Well, I think, and that would be amazing. And there's so many people in this wonderful city who would love all of that too. I mean, and so, okay. So we could talk forever. But we are now at the point in the show where we ask each of our guests to give our listeners a challenge. I'm very curious what your challenge is going to be for our listeners, Chris.
Well, I've listened to a number of your podcasts, and I love that question, and it's so wonderful for all of us to have that opportunity. So I was vacillating between how grandiose we want to be as design thinkers, or how we really want to focus as a professional, especially a professional landscape architect. So I devised a question.
Okay.
If you were a landscape architect, what would you like to do to most influence our physical environment?
Ooh. Okay.
Yeah.
I like that.
Can you say that again?
Yes. So if you were a landscape architect, what would you like to do to most influence our physical environment? So it could be as simple as give me more water, give me more shade, give me, it reminds me of many years ago, we had the opportunity to introduce landscape architecture to a middle school here in Jacksonville.
Okay.
And it was all about drawing. I love the drawing, but we asked what the students would do if they had the opportunity to design a space, a park.
Oh, wow.
And if you would have seen some of the things, I wanted to hire the whole classroom.
Oh,
I said, if
yeah.
I take this classroom, I can start an office right now and be the best design office probably in the Southeast.
Oh my
These
gosh.
kids are incredible thinkers. They're incredible thinkers and never lose
Yeah.
that creative edge. Always be thinking differently. Always question. Always draw. Always
Yeah.
define what you think it should be. That's
Yeah.
what's fun. That's what's fun. And and for the kids that may be listening out there as well, I failed second grade art because my art teacher told me I could not color within the lines.
Oh,
So I took that to heart, and I haven't been coloring within the lines since.
for a very long time. There you go.
Nice.
So
Way
stay
to listen to
creative.
your teacher.
There you go. There you go.
Sometimes, the thing that a teacher tells you inspires you, perhaps not in
Absolutely.
ways they thought, but you go back to that and sometimes you learn things like that. Oh my gosh. This has been so fun. I have really enjoyed learning all about landscape architecture. Thank you so much for being on Solve It for Kids, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.
Jennifer and Jeff, thank you all so much. Anything that I can do to continue to elevate the narrative of landscape architecture, I'm all in. You guys are wonderful. Really appreciate you having
Right back
me.
at you.
Yeah.
It's been great, and it's been a pleasure. The pleasure is definitely all mine. Thank you all
Well,
so much.
thanks so much.
Guest I would love to just continue talking to because I had no idea that I was interested in this topic, landscape architecture, but now I want to know more. And I want to do this challenge of thinking about, if I were a landscape architect, what would I like to do to most influence our physical environment? And my brain is just going nuts. What about you, Jen?
Yes. So I always thought landscaping was cool. Like, I'm not big into planting gardens, because that's not me. But I love how people, I've always been interested in how people create the spaces where they live, and buildings that are up kind of on hills, and how they do all of the different terracing and everything. So I think I learned a lot from Chris. So this was so fun. So if you guys come up with any ideas about this, how would you be a landscape architecture, what you would do within your own area, let us know. We'd love to hear from you. So tag us on our social media. We're at KidsSolve at Facebook, X, and Instagram. And don't forget to check out our website, solveitforkids.com, where we'll have lots more pictures of some landscape architecture and also links so you can learn more about the career in case you're interested in it. So check it out.
I love that. And I'm already thinking in my area, Colorado's got a lot of open spaces. I feel like it's going to have something to do with that. Until next time, you'll hear Jen and Jeff on
Solve It for Kids.